Welcome to Bring Me My Books. I'm one of the hosts, Kristi Cain. I'm here with Travis Lowe. Hey, Travis.
Hey there.
And today we have a special guest. We have Andrew Black with us, and we'll give an introduction to him in just a moment. But if you've just joined us and you haven't been listening to the last couple of episodes, and I want you to know we're talking about the Great Divorce. And Travis and I spent the first 2 episodes of this little mini series, I'll call it, splitting the book in half. But we talked about themes, just our own impressions, our own favorite moments, and now we've brought in someone who can elevate our conversation yes. and give us a little bit more, maybe I'll say accuracy, perhaps. But Andrew, we are thrilled to have you join us. I will give a quick introduction as far as like how you and I met and how it came about. And then if you'll share maybe a little bit more about yourself with our audience. But Andrew teaches at the school in Oklahoma City. We refer to Oklahoma City a lot because Travis and I both live there. Andrew teaches at the Academy of Classical Christian Studies. My husband works there, so they are co-workers. And then my children go there. Andrew's actually taught my son, I think 3 different years we discovered. And Andrew's taught and thought a lot about C.S. Lewis. And so, Andrew, what else would you tell us about yourself?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think I would add that your husband and I are kind of hybrid coworkers and friends, and he's also, loosely speaking, my boss. So it's helpful to clarify some of those things for the sake of transparency. And then otherwise, I'd say that I've lived in Oklahoma on and off since 2010, and in Oklahoma City since 2018. And my wife and I recently bought a house about 4 years ago now, and we've had 2 of our 3 children in Oklahoma, and we feel still a little bit like outsiders, but very much like we appreciate being able to call this place our place. And learning to love it and reside in it well. So I very much want to present myself as being as much of an Okie as I can claim to be, but not actually been born here. So I'm pro Oklahoma. Just want to make that clear.
Well, I would say then you're in good company, because neither Travis nor neither one of us are from Oklahoma originally either. So we're all people who've moved there and are loving where we live. So, well, Andrew, we've got some questions we'd love to throw out to you. We may dialogue a little bit as well, but they've heard from us. And so we'd just love to hear from you about this fantastic book. One of our hopes with this podcast is that people will either read along with us, and then as we talk, maybe process themselves, or they'll just discover a new book and then they'll dive in as well. So that's really our goal. So our listeners may or may not have already read the book. But because we know that some people may just come to hear us talk with you and may skip our first 2 episodes, would you give us a general overview of what's happening in the Great Divorce?
Yeah. So The Great Divorce is a short fantasy novel written by C.S. Lewis, in which he imagines himself having a kind of dream vision in which he accompanies a group of damned souls on a kind of holiday from hell to heaven, or an antechamber of heaven. The souls that Lewis observes encounter figures from their past life, and sometimes angels and family members and friends, and have these conversations in which the residents of heaven invite them to stay, and the damned souls struggle with the possibility of them staying, and usually end up refusing that offer as a consequence of something they can't let go of, they can't give up from their life. So the novel really is structured by means of these conversations. And about halfway through the novel, Lewis imagines himself encountering his own spiritual guide, George MacDonald, who he then dialogues with, and George MacDonald explains and builds out sort of what's been going on and what lessons Lewis needs to take away from these conversations he's witnessing.
Yeah, in the preface, it talks about Blake's work, Marriage of Heaven and Hell. I was wondering if you could address that work a little bit and kind of tell us, why do you think Lewis wrote The Great Divorce? Like, what was his prompting?
Yeah, so Lewis does make a point in the preface of the novel of referencing Blake's work. Blake is one of the most orthodox, heterodox poets that one can encounter, and much of his work requires, as some great work does, a lot of secondary sources in order to understand it. I've not done enough work with Blake to be able to speak with great accuracy about his work and also about why Lewis references it. I think that mention in the preface is more an explanation of the work's title, which is actually the second title the book received. The first was called Who Goes Home, or The Grand Divorce. And Blake's mention, Lewis's mention of Blake at the beginning of the preface is a little bit just an explanation of the title. I actually think the inspiration for Lewis's work comes not from Blake, which seems more like an offhand reference, but from Dante. And if you guys have done had any conversation at all about where Lewis is drawing from and what Lewis is trying to do, then you'll have already talked about how Dante really is Dante and the Divine Comedy are the sort of central sources for what Lewis is doing in The Great Divorce. So I think Blake is more of an offhanded mention. I wish I could speak with more accuracy about the work that Lewis is referencing, but that's more an explanation of the title, gives him opportunity to talk about one of the central themes of the book.
And we really had not mentioned Dante, so dive into that just a little bit for us.
Yeah, so I've heard The Great Divorce referred to as a modern retelling of Dante's Divine Comedy, which Lewis would be very flattered by and probably not in full agreement with. I mean, the novel's very slim and has these many didactic kind of scenes throughout it. Dante's Divine Comedy is encyclopedic in nature and in scope. But what they're doing in both of them is very similar. So you have a sort of living mortal who, with the help of a guide who has passed on and who knows more, travels through and the underworld and the afterlife. So in the Divine Comedy, it starts with the Inferno or hell, and then moves to purgatory, and then ascends Purgatorio, and then Dante ascends into Paradiso or heaven. And he's accompanied throughout those journeys in the first two, Inferno and Purgatorio, by Virgil, and then in the last third of the work by Beatrice. And those of you who've already read the novel will remember maybe when Lewis encounters MacDonald about halfway through the novel. He makes an explicit reference to Dante and tries to say that his encounter with George MacDonald's fantasy novel called Phantastes was to him what Dante's encounter with Beatrice was to Dante, the beginning of the new life. And that's explicitly a reference to Dante's one of Dante's earlier works called La Vita Nuovo, the new life, which is about his real encounter he had with this woman in Florence named Beatrice or Beatrice. And that the relationship between Dante's love, desire for, affection for Beatrice, and his love, desire for, affection for God is central to La Vita Nuovo, but also to the Divine Comedy. And this theme of love that's so central in the Divine Comedy is also become sort of a central theme in The Great Divorce as well. So to put it simply, in the same way that Dante is imagining his journey through the afterlife with these guides that he's known from his life, one only from his literary work, Virgil, and the other from his actual experience in the world, Beatrice. Lewis is also imagining his journey through the afterlife, accompanied by this literary hero of his, George MacDonald.
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled that you mentioned that, because as Travis said, we'd not talked about Dante, so that's fantastic. You did mention that Lewis is very clear that this is a fantasy, and you even see at the end, I guess spoiler alert if you don't want to hear, you discover that he's waking up from a dream. And so And he's also very clear that even though he's talking about heaven and hell, that he's not trying to say this is what heaven and hell will be like. In no way is it. Nor is he trying to say that people who go to hell get a holiday and they get to go choose. Like, he's not saying any of those things. But there are things that I think we are intended to take more literally. Could you, because there's so much that someone might be tempted to say, oh, this is just a fun story. What would you say that Lewis does want us to take seriously?
Lewis is, as you said, very clear that he doesn't want us to take the novel literally. He has this delightful line in the preface where he says that the last thing he'd want to do is arouse, I think the phrase is factual curiosity about transmortal existence. And then he also puts explicitly in the narrative of the novel George MacDonald's warning toward the end of the book that he needs to be clear if he tells anybody about this, that it's not real or not anything other than a dream.
Right.
But he also makes clear in the preface, Lewis does, that there is a moral, and that's the phrase he uses. There's a moral, but the actual trappings of the thing are not what it's about. And the moral of The Great Divorce is multifaceted, but Lewis seems especially to focus on this idea, which he says in the preface from the very beginning and then reiterates throughout the book, of this moment of choosing about how it is or when it is or why it is that the soul can or cannot make this positive choice to follow after God in obedience or to not. So what are the elements that go into that kind of choice and that moment of choosing? And Lewis, again in the preface, he says that there's this tendency for us to think there will not be or isn't a point of either or, a point where one must decide and give up something in order to affirm and receive God's love and this life that God offers. And so Lewis uses this conceit of the holiday from hell in order to explore this notion of the either or, of this moment of choice and how it is, what goes into one being able to or not being able to make this ultimate decision.
Yeah. One thing that we mentioned was how Lewis seems to have sympathy for each of the arguments of the people who are choosing to stay in hell. And I wonder if you see it as this was a very introspective type book. These were a lot of the struggles that maybe Lewis was struggling with personally. And then one of the things that Kristi and I did was, which of these arguments have you found yourself having? Or if you were to write a chapter of The Great Divorce, what would be the arguments that, that you've battled with that have been in your mind? And it doesn't have to be something that, it can be one of the ones that's in here, or it can be something without. What comes to your mind?
Yeah. So every time I read The Great Divorce, and I think this may have been something you mentioned in one of your emails to me, Kristi, there's something else that jumps out at me. One of the really compelling things about reading it this time is, as you're saying, Travis, the thoroughgoingness of the objections the ghosts seem to raise to what's being presented to them. You're right. It does seem like Lewis at least has real imaginative sympathy for a lot of these arguments, and it is probably likely that he entertained or had many of the same objections. I think the ones that are most compelling for me, or the sequence that's most compelling for me, arises in the conversation between the ghost of the mother and a family member of hers about her dead son, that presumably implicitly it's kind of present that he died early in his life, and that the mother spent the rest of her life mourning for him. And they have this rather difficult exchange about whether or not what she had for her son was really in the end a worthwhile love, or was actually love at all. And then George MacDonald and Lewis have to go back and forth a lot about this. And Lewis has a lot of trouble understanding what he's supposed to take away from this conversation. I think I find that probably the most compelling and the most difficult section in The Great Divorce. Lewis even says, like, I don't think I am probably the right person to critique that mother's love, not having had that kind of experience of loss myself. And George MacDonald has this very compelling reply where he says, yes, that's not really your job, but somebody's got to say that we can't hold on to these things that we love in the way that we're trying to hold on to them. And some of the strongest or most compelling objections to certain doctrines or dogmas in Christianity do center around whether or not Christians are people that have a thoroughgoing or real sympathy for people who have suffered, who are suffering under conditions that are difficult for us to understand. And I think that Lewis's treatment of that is nuanced and helpful, but also firm in the sense that he is willing to say in the end, and one of the central things he wants to say in the end is that we have to recognize that the things that we love that are less than God can only be loved in God. And if we attempt to love them for their own sakes in and of themselves, we will, in the end, lose them and not be able to hold on to them. That's part of the reality of sort of human and mortal existence. So that section I find really, really compelling and helpful. If I were to add a conversation to The Great Divorce, well, that's very presumptuous. I'm not sure I could imagine it effectively, but maybe more on this sort of similar theme of what does it mean really in the end to love something well and to love something in God, and is that something that I in my own life am capable of doing, or am I holding very, very tightly onto the things that I love and don't want in the end to give to God and let go of.
Yeah. And what a tremendous exercise to just get to the place to where we ask ourselves those questions. You know, is this love pure? Is this does this find its origin in God?
Yeah. I would love, in fact, for us to delve a little bit deeper into that topic of love and how C.S. Lewis is discussing it both in this book, maybe even a little bit beyond. But let's take a brief break. We're going to hear a little bit from our sponsors, and then we will be right back.
Situated in Bluefield, West Virginia, the Hopewards Writers Conference seeks to equip and encourage their patrons to tell stories of hope. This year's conference will focus on the question of living between cultures and the unique potential it holds for creativity. The conference will offer many exciting guest author speakers this year, and can't wait to learn what God has been speaking into their lives. Come with us and help us tell stories of hope. LifeSprings Resources is committed to providing innovative learning resources for the local church. Our products reflect our commitment to the development of new and innovative ways to experience scriptural truth. Whether you're looking for material for your small group, need new curriculum for Sunday school, or you're just trying to stock up on church supplies, we've got you covered. Look for us online at lifespringsresources.com or call us at 1-800-541-1376, and our friendly customer service team will be happy to assist you.
Welcome back to Bring Me My Books. Travis and I have been enjoying this conversation. We're talking with Andrew Black, who is a teacher at the Academy of Classical Christian Studies. He teaches on Lewis and has studied and read. And so, Andrew, when we were finishing up the first segment, we were talking a bit about love. And this is a recurring theme. I think I see it in this book as well as others. But I want to read a couple of the quotes that Lewis presents in this book about this topic. At one point, MacDonald says, "Love, as mortals understand the word, isn't enough." And then later on, as you find a character referring to, I'm going to refer to her as the lady, and she comes in and she's really, in some ways, a beautiful example of virtue and humility and love, I would say. And she says, "I am in love. In love, do you understand? Yes, now I love truly. What we called love down there was mostly the craving to be loved. In the main, I loved you for my own sake, because I needed you." And so that really kind of gets into this, the way that we see love here on earth, contrasted with the way Lewis is imagining God and fully intends for our love to look like, and that he is love. So I'm not going to go any more than that. I want you to respond. Why do you think this topic, first of all, is so important?
So as we were talking a little bit about before the break, it seems like this is one of, if not the central themes or lessons in Lewis's novel. So this question of what does it mean to love something truly, which for Lewis means what does it mean to love something in God rather than in and of itself for its own sake. Mm-hmm. That seems to me to be a question that needs desperately to be asked, but also a question that has fallen out of much of our conversation, yes, much of our way of thinking about love. And Lewis is very interested in this question in The Great Divorce, but then also in his larger body of work as well. This is a consistently recurring theme. What does it mean to love something not for its own sake, but in God? And maybe, I mean, it's so much a theme in Lewis's work that it comes up again in his very last novel, Till We Have Faces. The character of Arul wrestles throughout that novel with her love and affection for her sister Istra, or Psyche, and whether or not her love is, viciously self-interested or disinterested and pure becomes one of the central hinges of that novel. So it's ever relevant for Lewis, and it's certainly relevant for us in that we've, in some ways, seemingly forgotten how to ask that question, what the content of that question even is. Mm-hmm.
There's so many things. This book is astonishing to me. We've talked about it in the previous episodes, but to be, written in the 40s, I believe it was the 40s. It just feels like, it almost feels like there's nothing that's not relevant for us today. So
it's kind of that idea that's, I think it was Buechner said, when we tell our story, we're telling everyone's story in some way. Mm. And so this book is so introspective. I think it's Lewis just being honest with his lived experience, that we find truth in it for all of us who have lived in this life. Kristi was talking in the last episode about the love of a mother and trying to figure out, she has sons that are kind of moving out of the house. How does she let go? How does she love in a way that is pure? And as you said, that's a question that maybe we don't ask enough anymore. So if we get nothing else from this book, maybe it's a challenge to ask those introspective questions and just ask ourselves, is our love self-interested? Are we being selfish? And what I've found is most often when I ask that question, the answer is yes. I am being selfish. And I think that's our tendency. But maybe just asking that question could help us to battle that selfishness. So that's something that I get from this. That's a reason that I would read this. But what would you say if somebody's listening to this, they've never read the book, they've heard us talk about it, why should they read the book? Why would you challenge someone to read it?
Well, first of all, it's easy to miss in conversations about the more serious moral of the work that the book itself is enjoyable to read. At the dialogues between the ghosts and their friends, that the conversations that Lewis has with George MacDonald, that the imagining of this antechamber of heaven as more real and hard and true than any of the ghosts are capable of encountering, and the consequences of that are enjoyable to read, and much of the novel is, at the same time as it's serious, also kind of funny. So there's a lighter reason to read it, and I think one of the wonderful things about all of Lewis's writing is that you can visit it at different ages. And when you return to it again, so first time you read it as a teenager, and then again, later, you'll realize that you didn't understand actually what it is that you were reading. So that's a lovely reason to revisit Lewis if you haven't read him for some time. I think maybe what might be the most helpful thing I think about this book, if one reads it and takes it seriously, one of the main reasons to read it is that it uncovers to a great extent one's own capacity for self-deception, the way that one wants to live in this kind of grand narrative of one's own self-importance and dignity. One of the recurring things about many of these ghosts is that they have this semi-tragic but compelling story they're telling themselves about their own lives. And one of the things that their friends or the angels tell them repeatedly is, no, you have to let that go. It's not like that. It's actually so simple, don't you understand? It's so easy to get. And this is something I find really compelling about Lewis, even in his other writing, especially until we have Faces, which I've taught for several years. This idea that what one does when one is deluded, especially in sin, is tell oneself and live into this story of one's own tragic grandeur. And that what the novel punctures so effectively throughout, if you're really looking for it, is that conceit that really at the back of that is one's desire to be sort of special and distinct and prideful and worthy in and of oneself, when really what one has to do is humble oneself and receive what will be given to you if you are humble. So maybe the best reason to read it for me at the moment is this idea that it punctures my grand, tragic narrative of self, and invites me toward a kind of humility that's willing to receive God's love for its own sake and not because I've done something exceptional.
Yeah, we mentioned several themes, Kristi, and self-deception wasn't one we mentioned in particular, but that's so brilliant. We're so good at convincing ourselves that we're right, that we're the hero, that we're good.
Right.
And that's a perfect reason to read this book.
It is.
It's just challenge self-deception. I love that.
Yeah. And I want to reiterate, but I had somebody else, which fits right into this, all that you've been talking about. I heard someone say, please don't read this all in one sitting. Please read it slowly and carefully, prayerfully, I would say. And for all the reasons that you just mentioned would fit right into that. I think I'm so glad that we read this one. This is the only fiction that we've read this year, but I think you're right. It's an interesting story. It's a fun story to read, but then there's just so much depth and so much that we can gain from it. Okay, so we're going to end the way that we always end. And Andrew, I shared this with you ahead of time, so I think you're prepared. So with our whole theme of Bring Me My Books, we always end with, if you were stuck somewhere, be it a desert island or somewhere else, what would you want at the moment? It can be something fun, it can be something that brings you comfort, but what would you want to have with you? What would you want someone to bring you? So we're going to put you on the spot and let you go first.
Oh, I was hoping I'd go last, but Yeah. So I'd say one is going to be an answer to your question. The other is not.
Okay.
I have on and off for many years, had the practice of drinking a cup of tea at some point in the afternoon. And there's just something so wonderful and life-giving about sitting down, usually with a book or with a pen and paper, and having a cup of tea and taking some time, not to really try to do anything, but just to be. So I guess maybe it would be bring me my tea. And then the other thing you can't really put in a box and ship is maybe. So this was my original answer, but then the way you framed it, I wasn't sure quite how to sneak it in, but I'll put it in there anyway. It's going for or building in walks. So one of the things I started doing a couple of years ago was parking quite far away from the building where I teach, so that I have a 5 to 8 minute walk from my car to the building. And there's something that brings me a lot of joy and comfort and calm, about being out, especially in the morning, and walking from one place to another and not being able to take more than I can carry while I'm walking, and having to sort of listen and look and be in the world. And to me, it's very closely connected to what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, consider the lilies, consider the sparrows. To me, I think we don't take seriously enough those as actual imperatives for Christian people. So not just like, this is a lesson that I'm trying to teach you, but no, this is a practice that Christ obviously does and recommends to us to not be in such a hurry and to be willing to look at creatures and plants that surround us as we go about our days and take some comfort from them. So those two things. The second one you can't put in a box, so I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. I love that. Yeah, I think that's great. Do you want to go? Or you
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm going to continue the theme of tea, but a little bit different. So it's summertime right now. We're doing this, and my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, and I have discovered a place that's not new, but it's new to us in Oklahoma City called HTO. And it is between our house and where she takes some classes. And so we have started a fun little, probably once a week. We're probably, I don't know. We go during when it's a little cheaper in the middle of the afternoon. And so we go get our sweet tea. It makes us think of Georgia, which is where she was born, where we lived before, I guess. And it's both just enjoying, I think, this delicious tea, but also I think it's the memories that we're making together. It's just something like the two of us share. We're making a little stop into this place on the way to her class. And it's become a fun part of our day. And so it is both, like I said, bring me my sweet tea, specifically my coconut sweet tea, and but give me this time, these memories with my girl.
Yeah.
So, Travis.
And mine, so much of my life the last couple of months has kind of revolved around, treatment, recovery, that sort of thing. But when I had the lung surgery, they give you the same thing they give you when you have like open heart surgery. And it's this like teddy bear that's kind of real hard, and you're supposed to hug it when you're having some kind of pain. Well, about a week ago, I coughed, and they think I like popped some internal stitches, and I was in the worst pain. And I went back and got that bear out because I was coughing like crazy. And anytime I would cough, I would be like hugging that bear. And I actually went into work, and of course everybody is making fun of me. I'm this big guy coming into work with my teddy bear under my arm. And I was like, y'all can laugh all you want. I still feel totally like a man because y'all have no idea what I'm going through. I could definitely see on a morning when I wake up, I start coughing, that if I was writing a letter to Timothy, I'd be like, And if you don't care, now you have to put it like in a book bag so nobody sees it, and you have to kind of sneak it in. But bring me my bear. I have to have this. It's the only way I'm going to get through today.
I love that. That's awesome. I'm glad you told that story. Oh, well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation about this fantastic book.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, and that's it for this time. Well, our next book we'll be talking about Humble Roots by Travis's friend, Hannah Anderson.
Yeah.
And that's just a wonderful writer. And I'm excited. I haven't read that book of hers. I have read others, but I'm looking forward to digging into this one and talking with her. So that's what we have up next. But in the meantime, we hope that your life will be full of good books and good conversations. And we'll see you next time on Bring Me My Books. Thanks so much.